diminished with time. And you did not actually hurt anyone by simply being here. You only believed you did, and the belief was wrong, and the people who love you have been waiting for the moment they could tell you that. The yang moved outward through the stone, through the 12 signatures and past them, following the faint thread of the 13th the way you follow a sound back to its source, patient and directional and without urgency. He stayed in that posture as the Suriidi's light came up around him, as the old district began its slow morning process of becoming defined again, as the narrow streets received the first Shinigami moving through them on their ordinary business. He stayed for 2 hours. At the end of the 2 hours, the 13th signature was pulsing in a rhythm that was, for the first time, synchronized with his own heartbeat. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough to know that wherever she was, she had felt it. Enough to know that she had not turned away. He pressed both palms flat on the stone and felt the warmth complete the circuit, moved through all 12 and the 13th and back up through him and out again, and said the only thing he had left to say, "I will be here when you are ready." Then he stood up and went to find breakfast, because whatever was happening at the cosmic scale, he was still a person who got hungry. Chapter 14. Senjimara makes something. The needle Senjimara used was thinner than a human hair and moved through dimensional fabric the way ordinary needles move through cloth, with the precision of long practice and the authority of genuine mastery. He had been watching her work for 20 minutes before she acknowledged him. "You are standing in my light," she said, without looking up. He shifted 2 steps to the left. "Better," she said. He watched her work. The material she was working with was the piece of reissue recovered from the fragments room, now unfolded and stretched across a frame of her own construction to a size 3 times what it had been when she first showed it to him. The inscription covering its surface had been made legible through a process she had not explained in detail, but which involved several tools he had not seen her use before and an intensity of concentration he had learned to recognize as her fullest engagement with a problem. When Senjimara gave a problem her fullest engagement, the air around her changed. He could feel it even now, the specific quality of a very skilled person operating at the edge of what they knew, where knowledge became instinct and instinct became something closer to vision. "What are you finding?" he asked. "More than I expected," she said. She made a small adjustment with the needle that involved a movement so precise it was barely visible. "The encoding is not a record in the ordinary sense. It is not a list of locations or a map." She paused. "It is a feeling. A feeling. The Soul King did not record information the way a scholar records it. He was the medium through which all spiritual existence moved. When he knew something, he knew it the way a river knows its own course, not as a fact held in memory but as a shape inhabited." She made another adjustment. "What the fragment produced when you touched it was a piece of that knowing. The shape of his awareness of Ryunosi's departure." She paused. "I have been learning to read shapes instead of symbols." "And what does the shape tell you?" She set the needle down for the first time since he had arrived and looked at the stretched material with the expression of someone reading something that requires their fullest attention to receive accurately. "She is not in soul society," she said. "She is not in the living world. She is not in Hueco Mundo." A pause. "She is in a place that the Soul King's encoding describes as the space between transitions. The region that exists between one state of being and another, not quite death, not quite life, not quite either of the intermediate states." She looked at him. "In the oldest records it is called the Shurgon. The gap of will. It is theoretically accessible from any point in the spiritual world through the application of sufficient force in a very specific direction." Another pause. "No one has accessed it in recorded history. She has been there for 400 years, he said. If the encoding is accurate, yes. Alone." Senjimara did not look away from his face. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He thought about 400 years of the particular silence of a place with no one else in it. He thought about what you hold on to when there is nothing to hold on to, how you remember who you are when there is no one to reflect you back to yourself. He thought about what it took to survive that. "She must be incredibly strong," he said. Senjimara looked at him, and something in her expression shifted in a way that was not quite surprise but was its more considered relative. "Most people," she said slowly, "hear that information and say how terrible. Or they begin calculating access methods. It is terrible, he said. And we will calculate the access methods. But she has been alone for 400 years in a place between states, and she is still there. Still present. Still generating a signature strong enough to pulse in the old square from that distance. He looked at the stretched material. That is extraordinary strength. She deserves to have someone notice it. Senjimaro was quiet for a long moment. She does, she finally said. Tell me about her, he said. Not the records. You knew her. Senjimaro picked up the needle again, but she did not immediately return to the work. She held it in the way of someone who needs something in their hands to tell a difficult story. She was the first captain of the 11th Division, she said. In the founding era, the 11th was not what it is now. The current 11th Division is a formalized structure for combat-centered Shinigami. The original 11th was something different. It was the division of direct engagement. Of bodies in motion in the immediate and unmediated presence of whatever required confronting. She paused. Ryunosuke did not fight elegantly. She fought completely. There was no part of her that held back, no calculation, no distance between what she intended and what she did. When she was in motion, she was entirely in motion. And when she was not, Senjimaro said, she was the most still person I have known. Not Yuichiro's stillness, which is controlled. Ryunosuke's stillness was the stillness of something that has completed its movement, and is waiting, without impatience, for the next thing to move toward. She made a small adjustment with the needle. She used to sit in the old district and watch the streets for hours. Not because she was waiting for something in particular. Because the watching itself was a form of being present, and she believed in being present wherever she was. What happened? He asked. That made her leave. Senjimaro was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then, she hurt someone she loved. Not in combat. Not deliberately. The nature of what she was, that complete immediacy, that total engagement, it had a cost when turned on people rather than enemies. She could not regulate the intensity of what she gave. She paused. The person recovered. But Ryunosuke had decided, before the recovery was known, that she was damaged walking. That the people around her were safer for her absence. And she left before anyone could tell her she was wrong. She was very fast, Senjimaro said quietly. Faster than anyone could follow. Faster than she had ever moved in combat. She looked at the material. I think she ran because she was afraid that if she slowed down, someone would tell her not to go, and she did not trust herself to leave if she was given a reason to stay. He held that for a moment. She was afraid of being loved into staying, he said. Yes, Senjimaro said. Exactly that. He nodded slowly, and in the nod was the particular recognition of someone who understands not just what happened but why, the full architecture of it, the specific logic of a person who loves so completely, and so without regulation that they have decided the safest thing for the people they love is the absence of themselves. She needs to know, he said, that the thing she was afraid of is not a danger anymore. That there is someone here who can receive what she gives without being overwhelmed by it. He looked at the material. That is what we are going to tell her. Not just that we miss her. Not just that she was wrong to leave. That the thing she was protecting people from, she does not have to protect anyone from it anymore. Senjimaro looked at him for a long time. I have been working on accessing the Shogun, she said. The encoding gives me a directional indicator but not a method. The method requires a guide. Someone whose spiritual presence is strong enough to create a path through transitional space and stable enough that the path does not collapse. She held the needle precisely. I believe you are the only entity currently in existence who meets both conditions. Then we go, he said. It is not that simple, she said. The Shogun is not a place. It is a state. Entering it requires not just sufficient power but sufficient willingness. The space between transitions exists only for things that are genuinely in transition. It resists the entry of anything that is settled in its current form. He thought about that. I have been in transition my whole life, he said. I have never been settled. Senjimaro looked at him, and something in her face softened in the very specific way of someone who has spent a long time working a very hard problem and has just been given the last piece. No, she said. I do not suppose you have. She returned to the needle and the material, but the quality of the work had changed. It was faster now, and more certain, the work of someone who knows what they are building rather than someone still discovering it. He stayed and watched her work, and outside the workshop window the Siriides morning moved through its ordinary phases, and in the Founding Square 3 streets over, the 13th signature held its new rhythm, steady as a heartbeat, waiting. Chapter 15. Yoruichi at rest. He found Yoruichi in a place he had not expected. She was asleep. Not resting in the way he had seen the others rest, that composed stillness that was more like a reduction of activity than actual sleep. She was genuinely asleep, on a low couch in the secondary compound's receiving room, her arm folded under her head, her breathing the slow, even rhythm of genuine unconsciousness. He had been living in the compound for 12 days and this was the first time he had seen her sleep. He sat in the chair across the room and did not wake her. He thought about what she had told him, that she kept moving because if you kept moving the tired could not catch you. He thought about the particular arithmetic of that strategy, the way it worked until it stopped working, the way every strategy of avoidance works until the thing being avoided becomes larger than the avoidance. He thought she had probably been awake for a very long time before this. His chakra moved through the room as it always did, reaching into the walls and the floor and the air, and he consciously did something he had not done deliberately before. He directed it toward the couch. Not to wake her. Not to change anything about the sleep. Just to be present in it, the way you are present with someone you care about without needing them to be awake to know it. He sat with her while she slept and did nothing else for an hour. When she woke, she was immediately aware of him, the way people who are accustomed to threat wake with their full attention operational before the first conscious thought. But she did not startle. She opened her eyes and looked at him across the room and the awareness resolved itself into something else. How long have you been there? She asked. About an hour. She sat up slowly, which was its own kind of information. She was not in pain. But she was moving with the deliberate care of someone who has been still for long enough that motion requires reacquaintance. You watched me sleep, she said. I sat with you while you slept, he said. I was not watching. I was just there. She looked at him for a moment. That distinction matters to you. It matters because the first one is about me and the second one is about you. She was quiet for a moment, turning over what he had said in the way she turned over everything, with the careful technical attention of someone for whom ideas were also mechanisms to be understood. I have not slept like that in a long time, she said. I know. How? Because you woke up slowly, he said. People who sleep regularly wake at their ordinary speed. You woke up like someone who had fallen further than they expected and is taking a moment to find the surface. She looked at him for a long moment. You notice things, she said. And it was not a criticism or a compliment, but a pure observation, the kind she made when she encountered something she had decided to catalogue accurately. I notice you specifically, he said. All of you. It is something I do. Why? He thought about it honestly. Because you all matter, he said. And things that matter deserve attention. He paused. Also because you are all very interesting and I have never met anyone like any of you. Yoruichi looked at him with the amber eyes that had been measuring him since the day they met. In those eyes something had been changing by degrees too small to track in a single encounter but visible across the span of 12 days, some quality of the distance she maintained thinning, the professional assessment behind which she had lived for a very long time becoming something less defended. I want to tell you something, she said, and I want you to understand that it is not the kind of thing I tell people. All right. I have been running since before the Godiai 13 was formed, she said. Not literally, though often literally as well. Running in the sense of always having the next place to be, the next problem to address, the next position to hold, the next thing that required exactly my skills at exactly this moment. She paused. I am very good at being needed. I am considerably less practiced at simply being. What does being feel like? He asked. When you allow it. She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not know the answer. Then, like standing in a current, she said. Like water moving around something that is not fighting it. She paused. Like that hour just now. I was not doing anything useful. I was simply a body asleep in a room, and you were simply a body in a chair, and nothing was required of either of us, and... She stopped. And? He prompted gently. And it was enough, she said. It was entirely enough. And I am not used to things being enough without me doing something to make them so. He nodded. That is what rest feels like, he said. Not the absence of effort. The presence of something that does not require effort to be what it is. Yoruichi looked at him steadily. You are very young, she said, and she meant it with the same factual quality Senjimara had meant it, not diminishment but genuine observation. I know. And you understand things that take most people several lifetimes. I had a complicated childhood, he said. She made the sound that was the close relative of a laugh, the one he had come to recognize as the Yoruichi version of genuine amusement. But this time it was warmer than usual, and it stayed in the room for a moment after it was made, the way good sounds do. I used to run because the running felt like freedom, she said, after a moment. In the early days the speed was joy. There was nothing I could not outpace, nothing I could not circle around and see from every angle before it knew I was there. She paused. At some point the running stopped being freedom and became habit, and the habit became the thing that held me together, and by the time I understood the difference, I did not know how to stop without losing whatever the habit was holding. What did you think it was holding? Me, she said simply. I thought if I stopped moving long enough, I would discover that there was not very much of me there. That the running was the substance, and the person running was just the mechanism. And now? He said. After an hour asleep in a room where nothing was required. She looked at her hands, which were folded in her lap with a stillness that was not her usual poised readiness but something genuinely quieter. There is considerably more of me than I thought, she said. Yes, he said. There is. She looked up at him, and for a moment the technical precision of her gaze was simply absent, replaced by something that was just her, the person underneath the 400 years of practice velocity, looking at him without any particular agenda. What do you need me to do? She asked. For Ryunosi. For whatever comes next. I need you to know the Shogun, he said. Senjimaru is building the access method. But when we go, I need someone with me who understands transitional space, who has moved between states of being before, who knows how to navigate the place between places. He paused. That is you. Yoruichi's chin came up slightly. Not pride exactly. The physical expression of someone being given something that fits. Yes, she said. That is me, and I need you rested, he said. So sleep when you need to sleep. She looked at him for a moment, and then did something he had not seen her do before. She lay back down on the couch, tucked her arm under her head, and closed her eyes. All right, she said. He sat back in the chair. He did not leave for another 2 hours. And in those 2 hours the compound was quiet, and the Suriidii did its slow morning work of being itself, and in the chair across from the sleeping form of one of the fastest people in 400 years of soul history, Naruto Uzumaki sat and was present, and that was, exactly as she had said, entirely enough. Chapter 16. The Restoration of the First Kenpachi. He asked Unohana to spar with him on the 13th day, not because he needed the combat practice. Not as a test. He asked her because in 12 days of careful conversation and slow revelation, she had told him what she was and what she had been and what she had chosen, but she had not been it in front of him. And he had come to believe, watching her, that for Retsu Unohana there was a category of truth that could not be accessed through words alone. Some things could only be shown. He asked her in the old district, in the morning, on the steps of the building where Ryunosu used to sit. She looked at him for a long moment. You understand what you are asking, she said. I think so. I have not sparred since I chose the 4th division, she said. 270 years. I know. And you are asking anyway. I am asking because you said you cannot tell any more whether the part of you that was set aside is still intact, he said. This is how you check. She was quiet for a moment that had a weight to it. The grounds behind the old district, she said. There is a training space that is not used. It was built in the founding era and has not been used as a training space since the early captains left. Lead the way, he said. The space was large and open and surrounded by walls of the old quarry stone, overgrown at the edges where centuries of weather had opened cracks for roots to follow. It had the quality of places that were made for a specific purpose and then stopped being used for it, a held breath, a potential that had been suspended rather than spent. They stood at opposite ends. He felt his chakra doing what it always did, reaching outward into the space and the stone and the air. He felt Unohana across the space from him, and he felt the moment she stopped deciding and simply became what she was. It was not dramatic. There was no visible change. She did not move differently or stand differently or make any gesture that announced a transition. But something in the quality of her presence altered, the way a banked fire alters when the damper is opened, not suddenly loud but fundamentally changed in its nature, the contained warmth becoming directional, the gentleness of the healer's composure receding to reveal what had been behind it all along. He had been in the presence of powerful people his entire life. He had stood across a field from the greatest fighters his world had produced. He knew what power felt like from across a space. What he felt from Unohana was different from all of that. It was not aggressive. It did not press or assert or challenge. It was simply present, the way deep water is present, the way a cliff face is present, with the patient certainty of something that has been what it is for so long that doubt is not a concept it has occasion to use. "I am going to come at you," she said. Her voice had changed. Not in tone, not in volume, in quality. The precision was still there, but it was no longer clinical. It was precise the way a blade is precise. "All right," he said. She moved. He had sparred with many people in his life, including people who moved faster than ordinary perception could track, and he had always managed, through the combination of shadow clones and instinct and the fox's contributed awareness, to stay present in the exchange, to be a real participant rather than a target. He held on to that record for approximately 3 seconds. Then Unohana was past his defense, and the flat of her palm was against his sternum, and she could, had she chosen to, have ended the encounter in any of several ways. She stepped back instead. He looked at her. She was breathing exactly as she had been before she moved. There was no elevation, no flush, no physical indication that she had crossed the space between them faster than he had been able to register. There was only the small calm fact of what had just happened, and her standing at the proper distance with her hands at her sides. "That was the second best version," she said. "What would the first best look like?" "You would not see it at all," she said. "You would simply cease to be in opposition." He pulled a shadow clone into existence, and sent it at her from the left while he came from the right. The clone was gone before it reached her, dispersed cleanly, and he arrived to find her turn exactly the right angle to meet him, her hand on his wrist with a grip that was not hard but was completely immovable, the kind of hold that tells you very clearly that the person applying it is not using effort. "Again," she said, and released him. He hit her with everything he had that was appropriate to use against someone he was not trying to destroy. 3 clones, a sequence of high-low attacks timed to create a gap, a feint that had worked on every person he had used it on in the last 3 years. She walked through all of it. Not effortlessly, he could see her reading and responding in real time, that extraordinary precision now applied to motion rather than medicine. But she walked through it with the specific quality of someone for whom the opposition was genuine and interesting and simply not equal. He stopped, and stood breathing and looked at her. She looked back at him. And on her face, for the first time since he had arrived in the Siriidii, was an expression he had not seen before. Not the composed clinical attention. Not the careful gentleness of the 4th Division's captain. Something older than either of those, the expression of someone whose deepest nature has been given the space to breathe and is drawing its first real breath in 270 years. She looked, he thought, complete. "Well," she said. "You are extraordinary," he said. "I want to say that plainly, because it is true and you deserve to hear it." She looked at him. The expression that was on her face did not change, but something in it deepened. "I have not felt this in 270 years, she said. "Do you want to feel it more?" She considered this with the same careful honesty she brought to everything. "Yes," she said. And then, quietly, the sword on the shelf. "I have been thinking about it since you mentioned it." "What have you been thinking?" "That I set it down in a specific place and kept track of it," she said, using his words back to him. "And that keeping track of it was not the same as wanting it back." "But—" She paused. But I think I do want it back. I think I have wanted it back for a long time and told myself I did not because the wanting felt like undoing a choice that was right. The choice was right, he said. The choice to heal. That is not diminished by also choosing to be whole. She looked at him. You can be the healer and the first Kenpachi, he said. Those are not opposing things. They are both entirely you. The world that needed one at the expense of the other was a world that was asking you to be smaller than you are. He met her eyes steadily. You do not have to be smaller than you are anymore. The old training ground held its suspended breath. Unohana looked at him for a long time, and then she did something he had not seen her do in any of their meetings. She laughed. Not the quiet, contained almost laugh of someone allowing themselves a controlled expression. A real laugh, brief and genuine, and carrying in it the specific release of something that has been held under pressure for a very long time. You are, she said, when it was done, the most direct person I have met in 400 years. I have been told that is not always a compliment, he said. In this case it is, she said. She looked at the old walls of the training ground, at the roots finding their way through the quarry stone, at the open sky above. In this case it is very much a compliment. They sparred for another hour. She was right that the second best version was the one he could see. He never saw the first. But in that hour, something that had been locked in the architecture of the space, for centuries of a particular quality of training held in the stone itself, released itself gradually into the air of the place, and the old training ground breathed again for the first time since the founding era's captains had last used it. And in the Soul Palace above the clouds, the sword on the highest shelf of Anohana's room glowed briefly, softly, as though something it had been waiting for had finally been said. Chapter 17. Into the Shurgan. Senjimara finished the access method on the 15th day. She presented it to the group in the small room with the old district window. All 5 of them were present, Yuichiro at the center, Unohana to her left, now carrying a quality in her bearing that was different from before, broader, more complete, the healer's composure intact and something behind it that was no longer held back. Aisine beside her, no longer requiring the perimeter of her professional knowledge to occupy the space she took up. Yoruchi on the edge, rested in a way she had not been when he arrived, and Senjimara standing at the table with the stretched material and a new object beside it, something she had made, something he had not seen her make, not a tool or a frame or a dimensional needle, a garment. It was small, the size of a wide sash, worked in the gold to dawn silk of the map she had made 300 years ago, and the inscription covering it was the same encoding as the material from the fragments room, but rendered in her own hand, her own understanding, her translation of the Soul King's emotional record into something wearable, something that could be carried. This is a guide path marker, she said. It contains the directional encoding of Ryunosui's location in the Shurgan, rendered in a material that will remain stable under transitional space conditions. She paused. It is also. She stopped briefly. It is also the first thing I have made in 300 years that was made for a person rather than a function. The room received this in silence that was not empty. It is beautiful, Aisine said. It is accurate, Senjimara said, but the distinction she was making was not between beautiful and accurate so much as between 2 kinds of truths, and she knew it, and everyone in the room knew it. Yuichiro looked at it for a long moment. You have been working on this since the 2nd day, she said. Yes. Not only the encoding. No, Senjimara said. Not only the encoding. Yuichiro looked at her, and something passed between the two of them that had the quality of 400 years of friendship, the specific communication of people who know each other well enough that the important things are said entirely without words. When do we go? Yoruchi asked. Tomorrow, Naruto said. At dawn. From the old square. Who goes? Unohana asked. Yoruchi and I enter the Shurgan, he said. Senjimara stays at the threshold with the guide path and maintains the opening. Yuichiro and Unohana hold the square. Yuichiro looked at him. Hold the square how? The way you have always held things, he said. By being exactly what you are, in exactly that place, and not moving. He paused. The square has your signatures in it. All 3 of you who are still here. The warmth of those signatures is part of what is calling Ryunosui back. Your presence there will make the call stronger. Yuichiro was quiet for a moment. You have thought about this. I have been thinking about it since the morning I first sat in the square, he said. And if Ryunosuke does not want to come back? Unohana asked. Not as a challenge. As the honest question of someone who has loved a person for a very long time, and knows the full weight of what that person decided when they left. Then we tell her what we came to tell her, he said. That she was wrong about herself. That the thing she was afraid of is not what she thought it was. That there are people who have been waiting for 400 years and are still waiting. He paused. And then we wait some more. We do not drag anyone back. We show up. We stay. We make it possible. What she does with the possibility is hers. Unohana looked at him for a long moment, and behind the complete expression she was carrying now, the healer and the first Kenpachi occupying the same face without conflict, something warm and certain settled. Yes, she said. That is right. They went over the details for another hour. Senjimura described the mechanics of the access point, the specific combination of force and willingness required to open a path through transitional space, the way the guide path would function once they were inside. Yoruichi described what she knew of transitional navigation, the principles that govern movement through states rather than spaces. Yuichiro described Ryunosuke, the specific quality of her presence, the things that would help her recognize a genuine call from a false one. He listened to all of it, and asked questions when the questions added something and stayed quiet when they did not. At the end Isane said, "What do I do?" Everyone looked at her. "I cannot enter the Shurgon," she said. "I do not have the navigational capacity. I cannot hold the square the way Yuichiro and Unohana hold it. I do not have the construction skill for the threshold." She looked at him. "What is my part?" He thought about it. He thought about the windows in the ward and the flowers in the garden, and the name she said before meals for a woman long dead who had taught her to cook. "You are the one who remembers what we are coming back to," he said. "When Ryunosuke comes through, if she comes through, she is going to need someone whose first instinct is to make the space around a person feel like a place they can stay." He met her eyes. "That is you. The windows. The flowers. The way you are with the people in those 40 beds." He paused. "You are the welcome home." Isane looked at him for a moment, and the expression on her face was the one she had worn when he told her the windows were hers, that look of picking something up that had been on the ground and finding it in good condition. "Yes," she said. "All right." "Yes." They dispersed for the evening, and he sat in the compound garden beneath the plum tree that was definitely taller than it had been on the first day, and he thought about tomorrow with the particular quality of attention he gave to things that mattered. Kurama was quiet beside him in the way that was not the quiet of absence but the quiet of company. "Are you afraid?" the fox asked. "A little," he said. "The Shurgon is not somewhere I have any framework for." "No," Kurama agreed. "But Yoruichi will be there." "Yes." "And Senjimura's guide path will be there." "Yes." "And whatever I am, this world recognizes it at the level of its foundations." He looked up through the plum tree's branches. "The Shurgon is part of this world. It will recognize me too." Kurama was quiet for a moment. "You do not know that." "No," he said. "But I believe it. And in my experience the places you go believing in things do not tend to be the places that defeat you." The fox made a sound that was, he had decided after years of careful listening, the closest Kurama ever came to saying "I am proud of you" without saying it. He sat beneath the plum tree until the Suriidi's light went fully soft, and then he went inside and slept the clean deep sleep of someone who has done everything they can do to be ready, and is now simply giving the body what it needs. The 13th signature pulsed through the night, steadier than it had ever been. Chapter 18. The Space Between. The Shurgon did not look like anything. That was the first thing he understood about it as the threshold opened in the center of the founding square at dawn, Senjimura's hands moving through the precise sequence she had developed over 15 days and the guide path sash glowing with its dawn gold inscription, and the space between the square's old stones opening into something that was not space and not void but the complete absence of the properties that defined either. He stepped through. The sensation of crossing was different from the crossing into Soul's society. That had been a receiving, a homecoming in the bone, the sense of a door opening onto a place that knew him. This was different. This was the feeling of being entirely without context, the feeling of existing before the category of existing had been established. Not darkness. Not light. The prior condition of both. Yoruichi was beside him. He could not see her in the conventional sense. There was no light to see by and no medium for light to move through. But he could feel her, the specific quality of her presence, that precise coiled readiness that was her most fundamental nature, and it was steady beside him, oriented and intentional. "Can you hear me?" he said. Or thought. The distinction had no meaning here. "Yes," she said. The word arrived not as sound but as something functionally equivalent, direct communication between presences rather than between bodies. "The guide path," he said. He felt it. The sash Senjimara had made was not with him physically, there was no physical here, but what it encoded was present, the directional information rendered in her precise craft, pointing through the knot space in a direction that had no name, but was nonetheless specific. "This way," he said. Movement in the Shurgon was not movement in any sense he had a word for. It was more like intention becoming displacement. He oriented himself toward the encoded direction and was there, and then there again, and Yoruichi moved with him in the way she moved through every space she had ever occupied, with the effortless specificity of someone for whom motion was the most natural expression of being. "How far?" she asked. "No way to know," he said. "The encoding gives direction. Not distance." "All right." They moved. He felt the Shurgon pressing against him in the specific way Senjimara had described, the resistance of transitional space to settled things. He understood now what she had meant. The Shurgon wanted things that were genuinely in transition, not things that were in motion but things that were genuinely between states, either what they had been nor yet what they were becoming. He thought about whether he was genuinely in transition and understood immediately that he was. He had been in transition since the crossing. He was not the Naruto of the Valley of the End anymore. He was not yet whatever he was going to be in this world. He was exactly in between, and the Shurgon recognized it, and the resistance lessened. Yoruichi beside him was quiet for a moment, and then said, as though to herself, "I have been in transition for 400 years. I have never not been in motion. Perhaps it took this place to make me see they are the same." "Is that a relief?" he asked. A pause. "Enormously," she said. They moved deeper. He began to feel the 13th signature before he could determine it as a direction. It was not the square's version of it, that distant pulse in stone. It was immediate, present, surrounding, the signature of a person who had saturated this particular location with there being over 400 years of continuous occupation. The Shurgon here felt different from the outer regions. It felt inhabited. "She is here," he said. "Yes," Yoruichi said. Quietly. "I can feel her." He oriented toward the center of the inhabiting and moved through it, and arrived at the most immediate version of it and stopped. She was not invisible. In the Shurgon there was no visibility, but there was presence, and her presence was extraordinary, the most concentrated and specific version of a signature he had ever encountered. 400 years of existing in a single location in a space between states had made her as dense and particular as the founding square stone, as recognizable as a voice he had been hearing in different registers for weeks. He did not speak immediately. He stood in her presence and let his yang do what it always did, reach outward without agenda, give what it had, be what it was. The effect was immediate. The signature flared. Not with hostility. With shock. The specific shock of something that has been without warmth for so long that the first contact with it produces an involuntary response. The shock of cold hands pressing a warm surface. The sharp involuntary intake that comes before the settling. "Who are you?" she said. It was not a question. It was the demand of a presence that was gathering itself in response to an intrusion, the readiness of someone who has been defending a perimeter for a very long time and is now finding the perimeter breached. "Naruto Uzumaki," he said. "From Konoha, in the Land of Fire." A pause. "That means nothing to me. I know. I am also, apparently, the primordial yang. The piece of the Soul King that existed before the structure, the warmth that governed by giving rather than by force." He paused. "I am told this means something to you." Silence. The presence was still, the way things go still when they are processing something they did not expect. "Yang," she said. The word had a quality in her use of it that was different from how everyone else had used it. Older. More immediate. The word of someone who knew what it referred to, not from records but from something closer to memory. Yes, he said. You are not what I expected young to be, she said. I am not what anyone expected, he said. That seems to be a pattern. He paused. Yoruichi is here with me. Another silence, longer, the kind that contains a great deal of movement, that has no physical expression. Yoruichi, the presence said. Ryunosuke, Yoruichi said, and the 400 years of not saying that name were entirely present in the two words. Not accusation. Not grief. Just the weight of an interval that had been too long. You should not be here, Ryunosuke said. Either of you. This place. We know, Naruto said. We are here anyway. Why? Not a question. A challenge. The challenge of someone who has spent 4 centuries in a specific belief and is now being told the belief was wrong, and is not yet ready to believe that they were wrong. Because you left your signature in the founding square, he said. You did not erase it. You left it there knowing it would fade but leaving it anyway. That is not the action of someone who wanted to be unfindable. He paused. That is the action of someone who was afraid to come back and needed the coming back to be the other person's idea, so they would not have to carry the weight of wanting it themselves. Silence. He waited. You understand, she said? And it was not quite an accusation and not quite a capitulation but something between them, the sound of a person who has just had their exact interior architecture described accurately, and does not yet know what to do with the accuracy. I grew up alone, he said. I know every version of wanting something and not being able to ask for it directly. Another silence. Longer. Then, is she all right? Unohana. She is more herself than she has been in 270 years, he said. She would like to see you. She should not, Ryunosuke said. I hurt her. She recovered, he said. You left before you could find that out. She recovered, and she spent 400 years understanding why you left, and she has never blamed you for a moment of it, and she has been sitting on the steps of the old building in the old district on mornings when the world is too loud, and she has been waiting for you to come back to them. The presence in the Shurgon was very still. The person you were afraid of being, he said quietly, the one who could hurt without meaning to, who gave too much and too completely, and without regulation, I am here. I am specifically built to receive that. You cannot hurt me with what you are. You cannot overflow me. Whatever you are made of, I am made of more, and it does not diminish, and you can give me everything you have and I will be standing here when it is done and asking you to come home. The Shurgon, which had no light, was brighter. He could not have explained that to anyone. But it was true. Ryunosuke's presence, which had been the dense compressed signature of a thing that had turned inward for 4 centuries, moved. Not toward him. Not toward Yoruichi. Toward the guide path's encoded direction. Toward the square and the 3 signatures in it, and the warmth that had been moving through the stone toward her for 15 days. If I come back, she said, and her voice now had something in it that had not been there before, something younger, the voice of someone who has been very strong for a very long time and is finding it possible to be something else as well. I will not be the same as before. No one here is the same as before, he said. That is rather the point. She was quiet for one more moment. Then she moved, and he moved with her, and Yoruichi moved with both of them, and the guide path led them back through the knot space and through the directional encoding and through the threshold that Senjumaru was holding open with both hands and the full force of her craft, and out into the pale gold light of the founding square at dawn. Chapter 19. The Return of the 11th. She was exactly what he had imagined and nothing like it. Ryunosuke stood in the founding square with the specific look of someone who has been in a very still place for a very long time, and has just arrived somewhere that moves. The Suriidi's morning air and the white sky above and the old stone underfoot, all of it was moving by the standards of the Shurgon, and she was taking it in with an intensity that was not overwhelmed so much as deep thirst satisfied suddenly. She was not how he had pictured a 400-year-old founder. He realized, been expecting the composure and centuries' deep containment that characterized Yuichiro, or the architectural precision of Senjumaru, or the clinical presence of Unohana. Instead, she was immediate in the way Senjumaru had described, the quality of complete presence in a body, no gap between interior and exterior, nothing held in reserve. She was standing in the Founding Square, and she was entirely there, looking at everything with eyes that had not seen this place in 4 centuries, and were making no attempt to manage the looking. Yuichiro was across the square. He had seen Yuichiro's composure hold through everything. He had seen it hold through his own arrival, through the first meeting in the inner hall, through the slow and enormous shifts that had been occurring in the architecture of her stillness over 15 days. He had never seen it crack. It did not crack now, exactly. But it moved in a way he had not seen it move before, and the movement was not composed, was not architected, was not the product of 400 years of learning to express exactly what was appropriate, and nothing more. It was just Yuichiro, crossing the square. She crossed it the way she did everything, without hurry and without hesitation, and she stopped in front of Ryunosui and looked at her for a moment, and then she said, very quietly, "You were wrong." Ryunosui looked at her. "About hurting me," Yuichiro said. "You were wrong. I should have found you sooner. I looked for 5 years and then the world demanded other things and I let the world demand them." She paused. "That is the thing I will carry." "Not what you did." Ryunosui was very still. "I know," she said. And in those 2 words was the sound of 400 years and the particular exhaustion of being wrong in a direction you cannot correct alone, and a very different sound of someone who is no longer carrying that alone. Unohana came next. She did not cross the square the way Yuichiro crossed it. She arrived beside Ryunosui with the quiet certainty of someone who has always known where they are going and has simply been waiting for the path to be open. She did not say anything immediately. She stood beside Ryunosui, and the 2 of them were still for a moment in the way of very old friends who have said everything they need to say in the process of simply being in the same place again. Then Unohana said, "I want to show you something." And Ryunosui said, "What?" "What I have been," Unohana said. "The first Kenpachi and the healer, in the same body, at the same time. I have only recently learned that this is possible." She paused. "I thought you might like to see it." Ryunosui looked at her, and for the first time since she had stepped through the threshold she looked like someone who knew where they were and was glad of it. "Yes," she said. "I would." Senjumaru approached last, because Senjumaru did everything at the pace of considered intention and had clearly been considering this for a long time. She carried the guide path sash in both hands, folded now, and she held it out. "I made this to find you," she said. "I would like you to have it." A pause. "It is the first thing I have made in 300 years that was made for a person. I would like it to belong to the person it was made for." Ryunosui looked at the sash and its dawn gold silk with its inscription in Senjumaru's hand. "You made this," she said. "Yes. For me." "Yes." Ryunosui took it with the care of someone receiving something they understand the full weight of, which was the only weight it required. Aisane was waiting at the edge of the square. He had positioned her there deliberately, not because it was tactically optimal, there was no tactic here, but because the edge of the square was the threshold between the founding place and the Suriidea that lay beyond it, and Aisane was precisely what he had told her she was, the welcome home. She was standing at that threshold with the windows and flowers quality that was her most specific truth, that instinct for making space feel like a place where someone could stay. Ryunosui looked at her from across the square and Aisane looked back, and neither of them knew the other yet, and the not knowing was precisely right, because what came next was the beginning of that knowing, and beginnings deserve to start clean. He stood at the edge of it all and watched and felt his yang moving through the square and the signatures in the stone and the 6 women finding their footing in this new configuration, this version of themselves that had the 3rd founder back in it after 400 years. Kurama was very quiet. "Say it," Naruto said. "I was going to say nothing," the fox said. "I was simply going to be here." "That is unlike you." "Yes," Kurama said. "I thought the moment deserved something unlike me." He smiled and looked at the square and the morning light that was distinctly warmer than it had been on the first day he arrived, not metaphorically, actually warmer, the stones of the founding square radiating a degree of the warmth they had been receiving for 15 days back into the air above them. Yuichiro came to stand beside him. She did not say anything immediately. She stood beside him and watched Unohana and Ryunosui in conversation, and Senjumaru showing Ryunosui the guide path's inscription, and Aisane at the square's edge already building the space where someone could stay. You did this, she said finally. We did this, he said. She did not argue. But she looked at him with the expression that had been developing over 15 days, the one that was not just hope's outline anymore but hope itself, the real material, and said, What comes next? He thought about it honestly. The Central 46 will give their determination in 15 days, he said. We should be ready for that. The fragment needs more direct contact before it can begin to function independently. Ryunosuke needs time to find her footing. He paused. And the world needs to understand what has changed and what has not, and what is being offered to it. That is a great deal of work, she said. Yes. Are you tired? He checked honestly. He was not tired. He was the opposite of tired in the specific way that being exactly where you are meant to be produces its own energy, the way water running downhill does not tire. No, he said. Yuichiro looked at him for a long moment. Good, she said. And then she did something that was, he suspected, as natural to her as breathing once was and had simply not had occasion to be expressed in a very long time. She reached out and placed her hand briefly over his, where it rested on the edge of the square's founding stone, a gesture that lasted exactly long enough to be real and not long enough to require either of them to acknowledge it beyond the acknowledgement of it happening. Then she withdrew and was Yuichiro again, composed and precise and carrying 400 years of patience, and the specific new quality of someone who has stopped mistaking that patience for contentment. He looked at the founding square, at all 13 signatures pulsing in the stone below his feet, warm and present, and no longer fading. Around him the Siriidii received the morning and the old district held its patient stones and the plum tree in the compound garden 3 streets over was tall enough now that its upper branches were visible above the compound wall, which they had not been on the day he arrived. He pressed his foot flat on the founding stone and felt the warmth complete the circuit, and move outward in all directions simultaneously, patient and continuous, and not requiring anything back. It was, as it had always been, enough to build on. The world was not yet fully healed. The Central 46 had not yet ruled. The fragment had not yet achieved independent function. The balance of all 3 realms was still maintained by will and sacrifice, and the constant labor of people who deserved better. But there were now 6 people in the founding square of the Godii 13, where 2 days ago there had been 5 and 400 years ago there had been 3, and the stone under their feet was warm, and the morning above them was gold, and none of them were carrying it alone. That was not everything. But it was, without question, the beginning of everything. Act 4, What is already true. Chapter 20. The morning after. The morning after Ryunosuke returned, the Siriidii woke differently. It was not a visible difference. The white light came up the same way it always did, from no particular direction, filling the sky with its absolute and patient quality until every surface was evenly illuminated and every shadow had retreated to the narrow angles where 2 walls met. The gates opened on the same schedule. The division compounds began their ordinary routines. From a distance, from any formal position of observation, nothing had changed. But he could feel it. The stones of the Siriidii, which had been warming by degrees since he arrived, had crossed some threshold in the night. Not a dramatic threshold. Not a line where everything was cold on one side and warm on the other. But a threshold in the way that the first degree of spring is a threshold, the invisible point past which the cumulative effect of warmth becomes its own fact rather than a description of progress. He walked through the old district in the early morning and felt the difference in the pavers under his feet. They were giving something back. Not much. Not the full return of something completely restored. But the stones were no longer only receiving his warmth. They were participating in it, holding what they had been given and adding their own character to the movement, the way wood adds its character to a fire it has accepted. Kurama felt it too. The critical mass question, the fox said quietly, as he walked. We have been wondering since we arrived whether there was a point at which the giving became self-sustaining. Whether if enough of the soul society's spiritual material absorbed enough of what you are, the material itself would begin to amplify rather than simply receive. And the answer appears to be yes, Kurama said. And the threshold appears to be 13 signatures in the founding square all pulsing warm at the same time. He stopped walking. He stood in the narrow street, and felt outward with all the attention he had and understood that Kurama was right. The founding square, which had been the focus of his most deliberate work, had crossed the threshold first. 13 signatures, the 12 faded ones he had been warming for 15 days, and Ryunosuke's return signature that had arrived fully vital rather than needing revival, all pulsing in the same rhythm now, the rhythm of the fragment's heartbeat, which was the rhythm of his own. And that combination was producing something the square had not produced in 400 years. It was producing its own warmth, not requiring his input, not running on what he had given it, generating from the accumulated intention of 13 founding souls whose founding purpose was still intact in the mineral record of the stone, now reactivated and self-sustaining and spreading outward through the older material of the district the way a fire spreads through dry wood once it has truly caught. He turned around and walked back to the square. He stood at its edge and looked at it, and felt it, and understood for the first time since arriving what the original Soul Society must have felt like. Not this version, structured and governed and weighted with the accumulated precedent of 4 centuries of institutions. The original. The place where 13 people had decided together what they wanted to build and had poured that decision into the ground and walked away trusting the ground to hold it. It had held it. Under everything. Under the walls and the compounds and the political machinery, and the grief of 3 years without a Soul King and 400 years without the third founder. Under all of that, the ground had held what was put into it. He pressed his foot flat on the founding stone and felt the warmth move upward through his foot rather than downward from it, and the reversal was so unexpected that he stood for a moment simply receiving it, which he had never done before in this place, had always been the one giving, and the receiving had a quality he had no prior experience of. It felt, he thought, like being known, not by a person, by a place, by 400 years of accumulated intention that recognized what he was at a level prior to thought or decision. He stood there for a long time. When he came back to the compound, Ryunosuke was in the garden. She was sitting under the plum tree, which was taller than it had been yesterday. He was increasingly certain of this, the upper branches definitely clearing the compound wall now. She was sitting under it with her knees drawn up and her back against the trunk, and her face turned toward the sky in the way of someone relearning the specific quality of a particular piece of open space. He sat down nearby, not close enough to intrude, near enough to be present. She did not look at him immediately. She kept her face turned toward the sky. "It is different," she said. "The sky? Everything." She paused. In the Shurgon there was no movement. Nothing changed. I changed. My own thinking changed over time. But the space itself was perfectly static. She looked at him then, the eyes of someone for whom motion is now an event rather than a given. Everything here is moving. The light is shifting. The tree is growing. The stones in the square are doing something they were not doing yesterday. "You can feel that?" he asked. "I have been here since before the founding square existed," she said. "I was present when the stone was laid. I know what it felt like when it was new and what it felt like when it was ancient, and I know what it should feel like now, and what it feels like now is different from all of those." She looked at him. "What did you do?" "I sat in it for a lot of mornings and let whatever I am move through it," he said. "And then you came back, and that was apparently the last piece." She was quiet for a moment. "You needed all 13. The square needed all 13, he said. "The square was built by 13 people. It runs on 13 signatures. 12.5 was not sufficient." He paused. "You were always necessary. The absence of you was always the structural problem." She looked at him. "Not just for the square," he said gently. She looked away again, back at the sky, and he let her look because some things need to be received at an angle before they can be received directly. "Tell me about Konoha," she said after a while. He told her. He started with the smell of it, which was the first thing he always thought of, the specific combination of pine and river clay and wood smoke that was unique to that particular valley. And he went from there through the market street on a busy afternoon, and the faces he knew in it, and the way the Hokage monument looked from the academy roof, and the quality of the ramen at Ichiraku when Tucci had been cooking for 3 hours and the broth had reached the stage where it was no longer a preparation but a conclusion. He talked for a long time. She listened with the specific quality of someone who has been in a place with no stories for 400 years and is receiving one with every sense. By the end of it the morning had advanced and the compound was alive with ordinary sound, and the plum tree above them was moving in a wind that had come from nowhere in particular, and Ryunosui was looking at him with an expression he recognized from the others, that moment of being in the presence of something that gives without requiring anything back and not quite knowing what to do with the uncomplicated fact of it. "You miss it," she said. "Yes," he said. "I carry it with me. It is not the same as being there, but it is not nothing either." He paused. "What do you miss?" "From before." She thought about it for long enough that he knew she was being honest rather than diplomatic. "The moment before a fight begins," she said. "That specific second of total clarity, when everything that is not essential has fallen away and what remains is exactly what you are." She paused. "I have not had that in 400 years. In the Shurgon there was nothing to be in opposition to. There was only me, and the problem with only me is that I am not a place where opposition exists. I need the contact to be fully present." She looked at him. "Does that sound strange?" "It sounds like Unohana," he said. Something crossed her face that was warm and complicated. "Yes," she said. "It does not it?" "She wants to spar with you," he said. "She said so last night?" "I suspect she has wanted to spar with you for 400 years and now she finally can." Ryunosui looked at him with the direct and complete gaze that was, he was learning, her version of the expression that meant "you have just given me something I needed." "Tell her yes," she said. He nodded. Above them the plum tree moved in its wind, and the garden was warm, and in the Founding Square 3 streets over 13 signatures pulsed together in a rhythm that was no longer dependent on any single source. Chapter 21. The Determination. The Central 40 SIX's formal determination arrived not on the 30th day but on the 22nd, which told him something about how the deliberations had gone. Early determinations from Central 46 were not a sign of confidence. They were a sign of resolution reached through sufficient discomfort that the deliberating body had collectively decided that a decision, any decision, was preferable to continuing to sit with the discomfort of the matter under discussion. He had been told this by Yoruichi, who had been given similar information by sources she described only as reliable, and he had found that it matched his own intuitions about institutions in general. He read the determination in the compound's receiving room with Ichiro beside him, which she had chosen to be and which he had not questioned. The document was long. The Central 46 did not produce short documents. It began with 17 paragraphs establishing the precedents they had consulted and the records they had reviewed and the authorities they had convened and the specific mechanisms by which a body of 46 individuals governing the spiritual world had arrived at the conclusion that their determination was not a concession, but a recognition. The recognition, when it finally emerged from the document's accumulated justification, was this: that the entity identified as the primordial yang was a category of spiritual existence that predated and in certain respects superseded the jurisdictional framework of the Central 46, and that activities conducted by the primordial yang within the Suriidii that fell within the scope of the yang's original function were not subject to authorization by this body. It went on to define, at length, what it considered the scope of that original function to be. He read that section carefully. The definition was careful and legalistic, and, he suspected, had been drafted by someone on the 46 who understood that the document would be read by people looking for its limits rather than its grants. But within its careful borders, it encompassed almost everything he had been doing. The healing of senior spiritual figures. The restoration of the Founding Square's spiritual integrity. The direct interaction with the palace fragment. And in language so oblique he had to read it 3 times to be certain of its meaning, the reconstitution of the original founding configuration of the Godii 13. Yuichiro read that section once. She said nothing. He looked at her. 8, she said. What? You told Yoruichi you thought at least 8 of the 46 would not vote against it. The final determination was 31 in favor, 12 against, 3 abstentions. She paused. You underestimated by 23. He thought about the chamber and the warmth and 46 people in elevated seats, feeling something through the armrests of their chairs that they had not felt in 3 years. I was conservative, he said. You were, she agreed. And she said it in the tone she used for things she had decided were settled and did not require further analysis. The document contained one condition. He had expected a condition. Institutions that concede something always attach a condition, not because the condition itself is important but because the attaching of it allows the institution to retain the procedural form of authority even when the substance has been ceded. He had been told this by Yoruchi as well, and he had thought she was being cynical, and then he had read the document, and concluded she had been precise. The condition was this, that the primordial Yam would appear before the full Central 46 twice yearly, and provide an account of activities conducted within the scope of the recognized function. He read this and thought about it for a moment. Is twice a year a burden? He asked Yuichiro. No, she said. Then we accept the condition. She nodded once. I will send the response. He set the document down and looked at the window, which faced the old district's narrow streets. In the middle distance he could see the plum tree's upper branches above the compound wall, swaying in the morning wind. Yuichiro, he said. Yes. I want to talk about what comes after the document. Not the legal framework. What actually happens now. He turned to look at her. The six of us. What we are building. What it looks like when it is built. She looked at him steadily. 400 years of composure, and under it, the new quality that had been growing since the founding square. Something that was not hope in the ordinary sense because Yuichiro had never been ordinary, but was its equivalent for a person of her particular nature. A willingness to hold specific futures as possible without immediately cataloging their risks. You are asking me to say it, she said. The thing that none of us has said directly. Someone should say it directly, he said. I would rather it be you than me, because you have been in this world for 400 years and you understand its shape in ways I am still learning. But if you need me to say it first, I will. She was quiet for a moment that had the weight of a considered decision. We are not going back to what we were, she said. Any of us. The institutional roles remain, where they are useful. Unohana remains the captain of the 4th Division. Senjumaru's craft remains essential to the maintenance of the palace. These things do not change because they are good things, not merely habitual ones. She paused. But the configuration that held us before you arrived, the one in which each of us was defined primarily by function, in which the work was the identity, and the identity had no remainder, that configuration is finished. She looked at him. And the center of whatever replaces it is you. He received this without deflecting it, because deflecting it would have been dishonest and would have disrespected what it cost her to say it plainly. Not a center you revolve around, he said. That is not what I want to be. A center you orient from. Something that helps you know where you are so you can move from a known position rather than a guessed one. She looked at him for a long time. That is a meaningful distinction, she said. It is the only version I know how to be, he said. I have never been good at being the thing everyone points their life toward. I am good at being present with people one at a time and helping them figure out what they already know. He paused. That is what I have been doing for 3 weeks. I want to keep doing it. For all of you. For as long as it is useful. Yuichiro was quiet. Then she said, with the precision of someone who chooses every word, it will be useful for a very long time. He nodded. Then we start planning, he said. Not the cosmic scale. The next day and the next week. What does Ryunosuke need now? What does the fragment need? What does Senjumaru want to make next, now that the making for others has started again? What has Isen been thinking that she has not yet said because no one has asked her? Yuichiro looked at him with the expression that was becoming its own kind of familiar, the expression of someone who thought she had stopped being surprised and keeps being proved wrong about that. You think about them constantly, she said. Yes, he said. Is that strange? For most people it would be, she said. For you it seems to be simply what thinking is. He shrugged. Thinking about anything else seems less interesting, he said. She looked at him for one more moment, and then she stood and picked up the Central 40 SIXS determination and walked to the door, and at the door she paused and looked back. Naruto, she said. He looked up. Thank you, she said. And it was the plainest thing she had said in 4 centuries, the 2 words stripped of all the management and architecture and considered presentation that defined everything else she produced, just the thing itself. He said, You do not have to thank me for wanting to be here. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she left, and the room was quiet, and outside the window the old district's morning continued its patient work of being itself, and the plum tree moved in its wind. Chapter 22. The Fragment Wakes. He went to the Fragment again on the 23rd day, alone this time, without ceremony. He had been to the Fragment twice before. The first time with Yuichiro, when he had pressed his palm to it, and the light in the room had changed. The second time alone, 3 days later, when he had sat in the room for an hour and simply let the yang move between them in the way it moved through the Founding Square, slow and patient, and without specific agenda. The palace had been quiet on both visits. The royal guard maintained their routines in the outer corridors, and the Fragment room itself held the specific quality of a space that is both very important and very still, the combination that accumulates in places where enormous things are held in careful suspension. Today the stillness was different. He noticed it at the doorway. The room felt expectant in a way it had not on previous visits, the way a room feels expectant when the person who is supposed to be in it has not yet arrived but everything in the room knows they are coming. It was an odd sensation to apply to a space that contained only one object, suspended in its cage of maintained light. But the Fragment was pulsing differently, not the steady heartbeat rhythm it had maintained since he first touched it. Something more complex, more variable, the way a heartbeat becomes more variable when the body it belongs to is engaged with something rather than simply resting. He walked to the center of the room and looked at it. "You know something has changed," he said. The pulse shifted. He had spent enough time in communication with things that were not conventionally communicative, Kurama being the primary example across most of his life, to recognize the difference between the absence of response and the presence of one that did not use words. The Fragment did not speak. It had never spoken. But it responded, the way a tuning fork responds to a matching frequency, not with intention but with inevitability. He sat down on the floor of the Fragment's room in the cross-legged posture he had used in the Founding Square and pressed both palms flat on the floor and felt the razor-dense material of the palace transmitting the Founding Square's new warmth upward through its own structure. The square's self-sustaining warmth had reached the palace. He had not known whether it would. The dimensional gap between the Siriidii and the palace was not the same as ordinary physical distance, and he had not been certain that the warmth which moved through stone in the Founding Square would translate into movement through dimensional material. But it had. The 13 signatures, now self-sustaining, were transmitting something through every layer of the spiritual world structure, from the most material to the most rarefied, and what reached the palace's deepest room was faint but real. The Fragment pulsed. He felt it lean toward him. Not physically. There was no physical leaning possible for an object suspended in a cage of light. But spiritually, in the way that spiritual things in this world expressed orientation, it moved toward him the way the cold stone of the Siriidii had moved toward his warmth in the first days, not with intention but with the irresistible direction of something that recognizes what it needs. "Not yet," he said quietly. "We are not ready for the full reunion yet. The world needs more time to be ready to hold it." He pressed his palms a fraction harder on the floor and felt the warmth move upward through them toward the Fragment. "But we are getting there. Every day the square is warmer. Every day Ryunosuke is more herself. Every day the material of this place holds more of what it is supposed to hold." He paused. "We are getting there." The Fragment's pulse steadied. He sat in the room for 2 hours, not doing anything in particular, simply being in the Fragment's presence, and letting the yang move between them in the slow patient way that he had decided was more useful than any deliberate action. He had learned in the war that some things could not be rushed, and the attempting to rush them produced a worse outcome than simply staying present with them until they were ready to move. The Fragment was one of those things. He was not impatient about it. He was not the person he had been at 12, who had understood in principle that patience was required and struggled every moment to enact that understanding. He was the person who had learned, through years and loss and an enormous amount of practice, that the quality of presence you brought to a waiting was itself an action. That sitting still in the right way was not passive. Kurama was quiet in the room with him. The fox had developed a particular relationship with the Fragment over the course of the visits, not communicative exactly but adjacent to it. The way two old things recognize each other without having met. "It is lonely," Kurama said at one point. Quietly. "Not to him, not really." Just observing it. I know, he said. We are fixing that. Yes, Kurama said. We are. When he left the fragments room, the palace around him felt lighter by a degree, the way a room feels lighter after a window has been opened, not transformed, not solved, but receiving something it had not been receiving before. In the outer corridor, Senjimaro was waiting for him. Not because she had arranged to meet him here. Because she had felt what was happening in the room from wherever in the palace she had been working and had come to the corridor because being near it, even at the corridor's distance, was better than being far. She did not say anything when he emerged. She only looked at him with the precise attention she gave to things she was actively studying. How long? She asked. He understood the question. Weeks, he said. Not months. The square's new output is contributing. The founding signatures are no longer just receiving, they are producing, and what they produce feeds upward through the palace's material. He paused. When the fragment is ready to begin independent function, it will happen quickly. The preparation is slow. The moment itself will not be. She nodded. Her hands were already making the small precise adjustments to invisible materials that meant she was thinking through a construction problem. The cage, she said. The maintenance structure I built to sustain the fragment when there was nothing to sustain it. When the fragment achieves independent function, the cage will be unnecessary. She paused. I will need to design the transition carefully. The cage cannot simply be removed. The fragment needs to be stable enough to release the cage from the inside before we release it from the outside. How do you design for that? He asked. By making the cage understand it is a temporary home rather than a permanent condition, she said, and she meant it literally, the way she meant most things she said about construction. For Senjimaro, the materials she worked with were not inert. They were responsive. A cage that understood its own temporariness was a cage that would release what it held when the time was right, not a cage that would require force to open. Can you build that? He asked. She looked at him with the expression she had worn when he asked whether she could make something that was made for a person. I can build anything, she said. Not as arrogance. As a statement of her specific and hard-won truth. I know, he said. She looked at her hands. I am going to make something else first, she said. Before the cage modification. Something that is not for the fragment, and not for the mission. She paused. Something that is simply because I want to make it. What is it? He asked. I do not know yet, she said. I will know when my hands find it. He nodded. He understood that kind of knowing. He walked the old district in the mornings without a destination and found what he found when he found it, and the finding was always exactly right. Tell me when you know, he said. Yes, she said. And the word was simple, and without the weight of long disuse that it had carried the first time she had said it to him in that room. It was just a word now, the ordinary word of someone who has reclaimed the habit of simple agreement with things they genuinely intend to do. Chapter 23. Two Founders in Motion. Ryunosui and Unohana fought on the 24th day. He did not watch in the way he would have watched a performance. He was present in the old training ground in the same way he had been present in many places since arriving in the Suriidai, with the outward and open attention of something that did not require anything from what it was attending to. He had expected it to be extraordinary. He had not expected it to be what it was. They did not fight the way the training ground's history implied combat should look. There were no dramatic exchanges of technique, no visible deployment of Zanpakuto, no escalation through levels of intensity. They were simply in motion together, two people who had known each other for centuries before any of the forgetting, and the motion had the quality of a conversation rather than a conflict. A call and response where the response was not opposition but completion. Unohana moved with the completeness he had seen in their spar, that 270-year quality of something restored to its full nature. But something in her movement changed when it met Ryunosui. It became less contained. She had been the best version of herself with him, demonstrating her completeness, showing what had been recovered. Against Ryunosui she was simply being it, without demonstration, without the slight audience awareness that even the most unself-conscious performance contains. This was not performance at all. This was recognition. Ryunosui fought with the complete immediacy Senjimaro had described. No gap between intention and action, No space between what she was and what she did. She moved through the training ground the way light moves through clear glass, total and without remainder. 400 years of stillness in the Shurgan had not slowed her. If anything, and he thought about this carefully as he watched, the stillness had intensified her. She had been in the most silent place in existence for 4 centuries, and when she finally moved again, she moved with the force of everything that had been held. They did not speak during it. They did not need to. What was happening was not the kind of thing that needed narrating. He watched and felt his yang respond to the space, not with the usual outward reaching, not with the patient stone warming that had become his default mode in the Siriidii, but with something different. Something that simply matched what was in the space with him. Happiness. The specific, clean, uncomplicated happiness of witnessing something that should have been possible all along finally becoming actual. Yuichiro was at the far side of the training ground. He had not heard her arrive. She was simply there, the way she was sometimes simply there, having moved without announcing movement, the 400-year habit of someone for whom the ordinary rules of approach had long since become optional. She was watching Unohana and Ryunosuke the way he was watching them, with the full attention that she reserved for things she had decided mattered completely. He walked to stand beside her. They watched together. I looked for her for 5 years, Yuichiro said. Quietly, so that the words went to him and not out into the training ground. In the early centuries. Before the governance demands made the looking impossible to sustain. She paused. I had a way of looking that did not work. I looked for her signature in the places she would have gone, in the spaces of this world she would have recognized. I did not know about the Shurgan. I did not know about the space between transitions. I thought she had gone to the living world, or to Hueco Mundo, or somewhere that had familiar coordinates. She did not go somewhere familiar, he said. No. She went somewhere that did not have coordinates at all. She watched Ryunosuke move. That is entirely her. She did not do anything by halves. Not going, not staying, not anything. He thought about Ryunosuke's presence in the Shurgan, that dense and compressed signature that had saturated its location over 4 centuries, the extraordinary strength of someone who had sustained themselves in a place between states by the force of pure will. She is going to be all right, he said. Yes, Yuichiro said. She has always been all right. That was never the question. She paused. The question was whether she would stop insisting that all right was sufficient when better was possible. He looked at her. That is very specific, he said. I have had 4 centuries to think about it, she said. In the training ground, Ryunosuke and Unohana came to rest simultaneously, the motion ending the way a piece of music ends, not stopping but completing, reaching the point where the next thing was silence. They stood looking at each other, and whatever passed between them in that look was not for him to know and not for Yuichiro to know and not for any observer, only for 2 people who had been apart for 400 years and were now standing close enough to see each other clearly. He looked away from them and looked at Yuichiro. What do you want? He asked. Not for the world. Not for the institution. For yourself. What does Yuichiro want that she has not allowed herself to want because wanting things required holding them? She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that he thought she might tell him it was too early for that question, that she needed more time to make the distinction between what she wanted and what she had decided was acceptable. Then she said, I want to fight something that requires everything I have. I have not felt that in 400 years. The governance work is necessary and I am good at it, and it does not require everything I have. It requires patience and judgment and a long view, which I have all of. She paused. But the thing that is most essentially me is the thing that happens when the opposition is total and the only possible response is total in return. She looked at him. I have been the person who contains that for 4 centuries. I want to be the person who uses it. He thought about this. The fragment, he said. When it achieves independent function, there is going to be a period of instability. Not catastrophic instability. But the world adjusting to the restoration of something that has been absent for 3 years will produce pressure in the spiritual architecture of all 3 realms. Hollow activity in Hueco Mundo will spike. There may be incursions. He looked at her. The Siriidea is going to need its oldest and most capable defender operating at full capacity during that window. Yuichiro looked at him steadily. How long is the window? She asked. Senjimura's estimate is weeks. Maybe a month, and you think I should prepare for that? I think you should stop telling yourself that preparation is presumptuous, he said. You are 400 years old, and you are the strongest person I have met since arriving in this world. The world needs that. Stop treating it like an indulgence. Yuichiro looked at him for a moment. Then something in her bearing shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that would have been visible to anyone who did not know what to look for. But the thing that had been pulled inward, the quality of herself that was most essentially herself, moved outward by a degree that made everything else in her presence more vivid. Yes, she said, and she meant it in the way she had meant every yes she had said to him since the first one in the inner hall, completely, without reservation, with the whole weight of herself behind it. In the training ground, Unohana said something to Ryunosuke that he could not hear. Ryunosuke answered. They both looked at the old walls and the roots growing through the quarry stone and the open sky above, and then Unohana looked across the training ground to where he stood with Yuichiro, and she held his gaze for a moment. He nodded once. She nodded back. It was enough. Chapter 24. What Isane would build. Isane came to him on the 25th day with a question she had been carrying for longer than that. He could tell by the specific quality of her approach. She had the look of someone who has rehearsed how to begin a conversation many times and has arrived at the conversation having set all the rehearsals aside and decided to simply begin. He was in the compound garden. She sat across from him on the low stone bench that faced the plum tree. I want to ask you about my captain, she said. Ask what I see in her now. She paused, organizing what she wanted to say. The last 3 weeks. She is different. Not unrecognizably different. She is still entirely Unohana Taicho, still the healer, still the captain, still the person I have served under for 160 years. She looked at her hands. But there is something else there that was not before. Something behind the composure that is not behind the composure anymore, because it does not need to be contained. It is simply there. She looked up at him. What did you give her? Nothing she did not already have, he said. That is not an answer. It is the only accurate one, he said. I did not give your captain anything that was not already hers. I helped her hear something that had been speaking at a volume she had decided to ignore. He paused. The part of her she set aside when she chose the 4th division. She did not lose it. She put it down and kept track of where it was. I asked her what it was and she told me, and I told her she did not have to leave it on the ground anymore. Isane was quiet for a moment. She kept the sword, Isane said. Yes. I knew she kept it. I have been her lieutenant for 160 years. I knew the sword on the shelf was not decorative. She paused. I did not know how to ask about it. I was afraid that asking about it meant asking her to be something other than what she had chosen, and I did not want to be the person who made that ask. You could have asked, he said gently. She would have answered. She answers honest questions honestly, always. That is one of the most consistent things about her. I know, Isane said. I was the one who was not ready. Not her. She paused. I was afraid of what she would say. Afraid that if she told me the truth about the part of her she had set aside, it would change how I understood everything she had taught me. Did it? He asked. Change how you understand it? She thought about this carefully. Yes, she finally said. But not in the way I feared. I feared it would make what she taught me smaller. That knowing she had given up something significant to become the teacher she became would make the teaching feel like a reduction. She paused. Instead it made it larger. Everything she gave me, she gave from a position of having chosen to give it at a cost. That is not a smaller gift. That is a much larger one. He nodded. That is exactly right, he said. She looked at him. Can I ask you something else? You can ask me anything. What do you see when you look at me? She asked. Not what you said before, about the windows and the flowers. What do you see when you look at me right now, this morning, in this garden, without any specific context to point to? He looked at her. She was sitting with her knees close together, and her hands folded in her lap and her back very straight, the posture of someone who has spent a long time around people whose physical discipline she has internalized without noticing. She was too tall for the stone bench in a way she had stopped being embarrassed about, the awkwardness of her height having settled somewhere along the way into the simply physical fact of occupying a particular amount of space. Her face was open in a way it had not been when he arrived. Not unguarded, Isane was not unguarded, she was too careful for that. But the perimeter she had built from her kindness, the one that let people in only as far as they needed to go to receive care, had developed a gate, and the gate was open. I see someone who has been trusted with something precious for a very long time and has been so focused on not dropping it that she has not had time to look at what she is carrying and understand that it is not just entrusted to her, he said. It is her. She made it. She makes it every day. What your captain gave you were materials. What you have done with the materials is entirely yours. Isane was quiet for a moment. My captain is stronger than I am, she said. In some ways, he said. In others you are stronger than she is. That is not a competition. That is just the fact of two different people who are each their own fullest thing. He paused. The 4th Division is a better place because both of you are in it, not because one of you is the superior version of a single type. She looked at the plum tree. I have been thinking, she said, about the ward. And the medical wing. And the things I would do differently if I were designing it from the beginning rather than adding to what exists. She paused. Not replacing what Unohana built. Building alongside it. A new wing. Designed from my own principles, the ones I know now that I did not fully know when I was following her framework. Tell me, he said. She told him. She talked for nearly an hour. She talked about light and the specific angles that healing required. She talked about the spiritual pressure dynamics of a space where many injured souls were present simultaneously, and the modifications to wall construction that would optimize for recovery rather than containment. She talked about a garden she wanted to build adjacent to the recovery ward, not the practical herb garden she currently maintained behind the medical wing but a proper garden, a garden with benches and a path and things planted at heights that patients at different stages of recovery could interact with differently. She talked about it the way Senjumaru talked about her work when the work was fully hers, with the specific authority of someone speaking from the interior of their own expertise rather than from the position of someone who has learned someone else's. He listened with everything he had. When she finished, she looked at him as though she had arrived somewhere she had not known she was traveling to and was assessing how she felt about the destination. That is the most I have talked about my own ideas in 160 years, she said. I know, he said. How does it feel? She considered this honestly. Like the windows, she said. Like arguing for the windows. Like knowing that what I am proposing is right because it comes from the place in me that knows what right feels like, not the place that checks what is correct against what someone else has established. She paused. It feels like mine. It is yours, he said. She looked at him. The gate in the perimeter was open, and what was visible through it was the full dimension of a person who had been carrying more than she knew and was beginning to understand the shape of the load now that she could see it clearly. Will you help me plan it? She asked. The new wing. I will help you plan anything you want to build, he said. She nodded, and the nod had the quality of Senjumaru's I will, the word of someone who has moved from deciding to doing, the most important transition in any project. Above them the plum tree moved in its morning wind, taller now than it had been at the beginning of any of this, its upper branches catching the Siriidi's light and distributing it downward in the broken, shifting way of light through leaves, which was the most complicated and most beautiful way that light knew how to fall. Chapter 25. The Rooftop. He found Ryunosui sparring alone on the 26th day, not in the old training ground. She had found a space he had not known existed, a rooftop on the oldest building in the founding district, broad and flat and bordered by a low wall that would not have stopped anyone with the ability to fly or simply step over it, which meant it was a wall that had been built not as a barrier but as a gesture toward one, the founding era's version of a privacy screen. She was moving through a sequence he did not know and that clearly did not belong to any formal school or recorded tradition. It was hers, the way her stillness in the Shogun had been hers, developed over 400 years of having only herself to practice against, and having to invent the opposition. He sat on the low wall and watched. The sequence was extraordinary. Not in the way of technique, though the technique was exceptional. In the way of completeness. There was no redundancy in it, no motion that existed for aesthetic effect or for the management of appearance. Every movement served exactly one purpose and served it fully, and the purposes built on each other with a logical precision that was entirely different from the formal precision of received tradition. She had invented something in the Shogun. Not a combat style, exactly. Something that was combat's first principle, the underlying logic from which any specific technique could be derived, like a mathematician who, isolated from all texts, has derived arithmetic from its foundations. He watched for a long time. When she stopped, she did not look surprised to see him. She had known he was there. She had known from the moment he arrived, the way she seemed to know the position of everything within a certain radius without appearing to be paying attention to any of it. "I want to ask you something," she said. She was not breathing hard. 400 years of continuous practice had produced a relationship with physical exertion that ordinary physical limitations did not map onto. "Ask." She sat down on the rooftop with the ease of someone for whom sitting on a rooftop was entirely natural. "In the Shogun," she said, "I had a great deal of time to think. Obviously. It was one of the few things available to me." She paused. "I thought a great deal about what I had done and why and whether it was the right thing, and over the course of approximately the first 2 centuries I arrived at the conclusion that it was not the right thing, that it had been a thing done out of fear rather than wisdom, and that I had confused the two because in the founding era I had not yet learned that they could look the same from the inside." "What did you do with that conclusion?" he asked. "I continued to be there," she said. "Because having decided you were wrong does not automatically produce the mechanism for correcting the wrongness. I did not know how to come back. I had gone somewhere without coordinates, and I did not know how to generate coordinates from the inside." She paused. "I want to ask you how you found me. Not the mechanics of the Shogun and the guide path. The underlying how. What made it possible?" He thought about it honestly. "The founding square," he said. "Your signature in it. You left it there on purpose, and you did not let it go dark even when everything else in the square was fading. That was not an accident. That was a decision you made, probably not consciously, but a decision your deepest nature made regardless of what your reasoning was telling you." He paused. "You wanted to be findable. You wanted to be found. You just needed someone to be looking in the right direction with the right kind of sensitivity." She was quiet. "I did not know I was doing that," she said. "Most people do not know they are doing the things their deepest nature requires," he said. "That is not a flaw. It is just how it works. The deepest thing you are makes certain decisions below the level of the reasoning that could argue against them." He paused. "Your deepest nature was not finished. It was not willing to be completely unreachable. It left the door open." She looked at the founding district's rooftops spreading out below them. "When I felt your warmth in the Shogun for the first time," she said, "I did not know what it was. I only knew it was the first time in 4 centuries that I had felt something from outside myself." She paused. "I nearly refused it. My first response was the same response I had to everything in the Shogun, which was to contain myself and not be affected." "What changed it?" he asked. "It did not stop," she said simply. "Most things, when they encounter resistance, adapt to the resistance. Change their approach, try a different angle, eventually stop if the resistance is sufficient." She looked at him. "What you sent did not do any of those things. It did not change its approach. It did not stop. It simply continued to be what it was until the only remaining question was whether I was going to hold the resistance, or let it go." "And you let it go." "I let it go," she said. "Because I was tired, and because it was warm, and because the warmth was not asking me to be anything other than what I was." She held his gaze. "That is an unusual quality. Most warmth asks something in return for being warm." He thought about that. "Mine does not ask because it does not require," he said. "It gives because it is its nature to give, not because it is conducting an exchange." He paused. "That is not virtue. That is simply what I am." She looked at him for a long moment. "Senjimari used to say," she said, "in the early years, before the royal guard, before all of it, that the original Soul King's warmth felt like being known without being observed. Like something was aware of you in the most complete way without that awareness requiring anything from you. She paused. I had not thought about that in 4 centuries. I thought about it in the Shurgon, after you found me. And? He said. And I think she was right, Ryunosuke said. And I think you are exactly that. He received this without deflection, the way he had received Yuichiru's thank you, without the false modesty that would have turned it into something about him rather than something about her. I am glad you came back, he said. So am I, she said. And she said it with the complete immediacy that was her most fundamental quality. No hedge, no management, just the full weight of herself behind the simple true thing. They sat on the rooftop of the oldest building in the founding district and looked at the Suriidii spread below them, the white roof tiles and the compound walls and the old streets of the founding area and the young plum tree visible in the compound garden 3 streets over with its branches extending above the compound wall. I need to apologize to some people, Ryunosuke said. Yes, he said. Will that be complicated? The people you need to apologize to, he said, have been waiting 400 years for the chance to tell you it is not necessary. The apologies will be complicated because both things will be true simultaneously, and you will all have to hold both at once. He paused. But complicated is not the same as difficult. You know how to hold complicated things. You have been doing it for 4 centuries. She looked at him. You make things sound possible, she said. They are possible, he said. That is not a technique. It is just accurate. She made a sound that was, he was learning, the Ryunosuke version of a laugh, brief and direct and carrying in it the specific brightness of a person who had not had occasion to use it in a very long time and was finding that it still worked. Yes, she said. I suppose it is. The Suriidii continued its mourning below them, and the founding district's stones held their warmth, and somewhere above the clouds the palace's fragment pulsed in its heartbeat rhythm, a fraction steadier than it had been yesterday. Chapter 26. The Panel. On the 28th day, Senjimara told him what she had made. She showed him in the workshop, as she had shown him the map and the guide path sash and the stretched material from the fragments room. The workshop had become, over the course of 4 weeks, the most lived-in space in the compound, more evidently occupied than any room, its surfaces layered with materials and tools and the residue of precise work conducted at all hours. She had cleared a space on the central table. On the cleared space was a small panel of the gold to dawn silk. Not map-sized, not sash-sized. Small enough to fit in 2 cupped hands. And worked into it with the needle so fine the thread was nearly invisible was a scene. He looked at it for a long time. It was the founding square. He recognized it immediately, the specific arrangement of the pavers, the concentric pattern radiating outward from the center, the low walls at the perimeter, the entrance to the old district's narrowest street in the southeast corner. Every detail was accurate, not merely accurate in the way of a representation but accurate in the way of something that understood what it was depicting, and standing in the square were figures. 6 of them. Rendered in the finest thread he had ever seen with the particular economy of representation that produces recognition without portraiture, the sense of a specific person rather than a general human shape. He recognized each of them. The composed and centered figure at the north edge of the square. The taller one to the left. The one whose bearing suggested speed even in stillness. The one whose presence carried the double quality of healer and fighter with no tension between them. The one at the south edge, brightest, looking outward from the square toward whatever lay beyond the frame. And at the center, pressing 1 foot flat on the founding stone, a figure that was unmistakably him. You made this from nothing, he said. Without a commission. Without a function it needed to serve. Yes, she said. What was it for? She was quiet for a moment. Her hands, which were always in motion when she was in the workshop, were still. When I was learning my craft, she said, long before the Godai 13, long before the Royal Guard, before almost all of it, my teacher told me that the purpose of making was not to produce objects. The purpose of making was to make visible what was already true. She paused. I have spent 300 years making things that served functions. Structures, tools, systems. All of them true in the sense of accurate, all of them making visible something real. But not. She stopped. Started again. Not this kind of true. Not the truth that exists below function, in the place where things simply are what they are without needing to do anything. And this? He asked, looking at the panel. This is what is already true, she said. The 6 of us in the square. The warmth in the stone. The position of each person and what that position means. She looked at the panel. I made it because I needed to see it. Because sometimes the only way to be certain that something real has happened is to make it visible in a form that persists. He looked at the figure at the center of the panel, the one pressing its foot on the founding stone. You put me at the center, he said. You are at the center, she said. Not because I placed you there. Because that is where you are. He was quiet for a moment. You are an extraordinary person, he said. And he meant it in the way he said it, completely, without reservation, as a fact that required saying because facts that matter deserve to be said. Senjamara looked at him. Something had been changing in her face over the 4 weeks since his arrival, by degrees too small to name at any single moment but visible in aggregate, the accumulated effect of being seen and heard and treated as both the craftsperson and the artist and the person who was prior to both of those. The composure was still there. The composure was hers and would remain hers. But behind it, in the space where she had stored for 300 years the awareness that the composure was a choice rather than a default, there was something new. Warmth, he thought. Not his warmth, not the yang moving outward in its patient way. Her warmth. The specific warmth of a person who has rediscovered that they are capable of giving something beyond craft, beyond precision, beyond the beautiful and accurate things that their hands produce. The warmth of someone who has remembered that they can simply care, freely, without structure. She folded the panel along its natural lines and held it for a moment. I made it for you, she said. I want you to have it. He received it with both hands. He held it for a moment, feeling the silk and the fine inscription and the weight of the thing that was not the weight of the material but the weight of what it contained, which was the truth of 4 weeks rendered in gold thread by hands that had spent 3 centuries waiting to make something like this. Thank you, he said. You are welcome, she said. And the words were simple and unarchitected, and entirely hers. Chapter 27. The fragment stands alone. The fragment moved on the 30th day, not in the physical sense. It remained suspended in Senjamara's cage of maintained light, stable and patient, in the deepest room of the Soul Palace. But its pulse changed, and the change was the kind that the careful attendant of something long waiting learns to distinguish from all the smaller changes that precede it. It was ready. Senjamara felt it from the workshop and arrived at the fragment's room before him. Yuichiro felt it from wherever Yuichiro always was and was there when he arrived. Unohana came from the direction of the compound. Ryunosui, who had been on the founding district's rooftop, arrived with the speed that was her most essential quality. Yoruichi simply appeared, which was her preferred mode of arrival for things that mattered. Isane came last and stood at the room's threshold with the specific quality of someone who is exactly where they are supposed to be. The fragment was pulsing with a complexity it had not previously shown. He had described it to Senjamaro as becoming more variable when engaged with something, the way a heartbeat is more variable during activity than during rest. Now it was variable in a way that suggested not activity but awakening, the arrhythmia of something finding its own rhythm rather than mirroring another's. It is trying to generate its own pulse, Senjamaro said. She was already at the cage's maintenance structure, her needle moving through adjustments he could not track at the speed she was making them. The fragment has been mirroring yours since the first contact. Now it is attempting to produce an independent rhythm. What does that mean? Yoruichi asked. It means, Senjamaro said, without looking up from the cage, that the reconnection has reached the threshold where the fragment has enough restored function to attempt self-direction. It is no longer purely a fragment sustained by external maintenance. It is beginning to be, again, a source. He stood in the center of the room and felt what was happening with everything he had. The fragment was not becoming the Soul King. He understood this immediately and completely. What had been lost with the Soul King's death was not recoverable in the sense of restoration. The specific configuration of that existence was gone and would remain gone. What was happening was different. The fragment, which had been a remnant, was finding a new form of function, not the original function, not the fixed point absolute of the Soul King's existence, but something that had the essential quality of that existence while being shaped by the 30 days of contact with the primordial yang. Something that gave rather than simply being. Something that moved. He walked to the fragment, and pressed his palm flat against it for the third time. The room's light changed again, as it had on the first contact. But this time the change was not a brightening. It was a deepening, the way color deepens when seen through clear water, every wavelength present and more itself than it had been in the flat air above. He felt the fragment's pulse synchronize with his, and then he felt it do something it had not done before. He felt it push back, not against him. Through him. Using the connection that had been building for 30 days as a channel, the fragment sent something outward in all directions simultaneously, through the palace's walls and through the dimensional structure of the spiritual world and down through the layers of the Siriidii to the founding square where the 13 signatures held their self-sustaining warmth, and the warmth and the fragment's pulse met in the stone and recognized each other. And the recognition produced something neither could have produced alone. He felt it move through the world, through soul society and through the thin membrane between soul society and the living world and through the heavy silence of Hueco Mundo, a single pulse, warm and directional and unmistakable to anything with the sensitivity to receive it, saying, something has returned. Not the old thing. Not the exact form that existed before. But something with the essential quality. Something that remembered what it was built to do and was, slowly and on its own terms, beginning to do it again. In the room, the women he had spent 30 days with felt it too. He could see it in each of them. In Yuichiro, the stillness that was no longer purely controlled but had found in itself the quality of genuine peace, the stillness of someone who has arrived somewhere rather than someone who is holding position. In Senjumaru, whose hands had stilled above the cage's maintenance structure in the moment of the pulse, who was looking at the fragment with the expression of someone who has just seen the result of their longest and most careful project, and found it exactly right. In Unohana, who had her palm flat against the room's wall the way she had held it against the stone wall in the Siriidi's old district, receiving through the material the information it carried. In Ryunosuke, whose complete presence in her body had taken on an additional dimension, the specific aliveness of someone for whom the world has just become more real rather than less. In Yoruichi, who was still, genuinely still, not the controlled stillness of someone holding themselves in check but the natural stillness of someone who is exactly where they are and has stopped needing to be anywhere else. In Isane, at the threshold, whose face had the quality of the windows she had fought for, clear and letting through exactly what was there without diminishing it, he took his palm from the fragment. The pulse continued without him. It did not need him to maintain it. It was producing its own rhythm now, independent, self-directed, the first truly independent pulse the fragment had generated since the Soul King's death 3 years ago. He stepped back. He felt Kurama, very quiet, in the way the fox was quiet when the quiet itself was the statement. Kurama, he said. I know, the fox said. I know. He looked around the room at the women who had been alone in one configuration or another when he arrived and who were not alone now, would not be alone in the same way again, and felt the very ordinary and very complete satisfaction of someone who has done what they came to do, not finished. Nothing of this scale was finished in 30 days. The balance between the 3 realms would take months to stabilize. Ryunosuke had apologies to make and relationships to rebuild. Isane had a wing to design and a garden to plant. Senjumaru had more things to make, made for persons rather than functions. Yoruichi had to learn the specific quality of rest without apology. Yuichiro had to find the opposition that required everything she had, not finished, but begun. Genuinely, irreversibly, structurally begun. Yuichiro came to stand beside him. He had learned to stop being surprised by her presence. She simply was where she needed to be, the way she had always been, only now the where she needed to be had added the dimension of wherever he was. The cage, she said quietly. He looked at Senjumaru, who was already making adjustments, her hands moving with the authority of someone who has prepared for exactly this moment. The cage, Senjumaru confirmed. She made one final adjustment, and the pale light that had sustained the fragment for 3 years shifted from sustaining to simply being present, a witness rather than a support, and the fragment hung in the room on its own for the first time in 3 years. No one spoke. The pulse was steady and warm and entirely its own. He let out a breath. Good, he said. It was the smallest word for the largest thing he had said since arriving, and it was exactly right, and no one in the room felt the need to add to it. Chapter 28. What is already true. They gathered in the small room with the old district window on the 31st day, all 6 of them, the configuration that had been assembling itself since the first night in the inner hall, and was now its completed form. He had asked for the gathering. Not Yuichiro. Him. They sat in the arc that was the room's natural arrangement, closer now than in any previous meeting, the arc tighter with the addition of Ryunosuke, who occupied the far end with the complete presence that was her way of occupying any space, and the small room held all of them without any of them requiring more room than they took. He had been thinking about what he wanted to say for several days. He had not rehearsed it. He did not rehearse things. But he had been thinking about it in the walking way, in the morning district and the compound garden and the fragments room and the founding square, letting it arrive at its own clarity through the ordinary process of moving through the world while holding a question. The question had arrived at its clarity. I want to tell you something, he said, that I have not said directly, because I wanted to be certain of it before I said it. I am certain of it now. They waited. I am not going back, he said. Not to the living world. Not to Konoha. Not to the life that was mine before the crossing. He paused. Not because I do not love those things. I love them. I carry Konoha with me and I always will, and the people there are part of what I am in ways that distance and dimension do not change. He paused again. But what I am, the thing I most fundamentally am, belongs to this world in a way that the living world could not contain. This world recognized me at its foundations. The founding square recognized me. The fragment recognized me. All of you recognized me. He looked at each of them in turn. A person belongs where they are recognized at the level of what they are most essentially. I belong here. The room was quiet. He let the quiet hold for a moment, because what he had said deserved to sit in the room before the next thing arrived. I also want to say, he continued, that belonging here does not mean belonging to an institution or a position or a function. I have told you already that I am not a cornerstone and not a fixed point. I am a person who is present with people. That is what I want to continue to be. He looked at Yuichiro. Your governance does not need me in it. It needs you in it, and you are the best possible person for it. He looked at Unohana. Your division does not need me in it. It needs you in it, complete, which is what you are now. He looked at Senjumaru. Your craft does not need me in it. It only needed me to remind you that the craft was always yours. He looked at Yorichi. Your motion does not need me in it. It only needed to stop being the only thing. He looked at Isane. Your wing does not need me in it. It needs you in it, with your own principles, which are better than any I could give you. He looked at Ryunosuke. And you, he said, needed nothing from me that you did not already have. You only needed to hear from something that could receive what you are without being damaged by it, that coming home was safe. He paused. I am going to be here, he said. Present with each of you. In the way I am present, which is specific and genuine and not going to change. I am going to sit in the founding square in the mornings and feel whatever the world needs felt. I am going to be in the fragments room when the fragment needs company. I am going to argue with Yuichiro about the pace of things and listen to Senjumaru describe constructions I cannot fully visualize and watch Ryunosuke and Unohana discover what they are capable of when they are together, and help Isane design the best medical wing the Siriidii has ever had and sit with Yorichi while she sleeps. He paused. And I am going to keep doing all of that for as long as it is useful and true. The window showed the old district's narrow street, catching the morning light. The Siriidii's white had taken on a warmth over the last week that had not been there before. Something in the spectrum of it shifted by degrees toward gold. Ryunosuke spoke first. You described staying, she said. But you have not described what you want. You told us what you intend to give. You have not said what you want to receive. He looked at her. She was looking at him with the complete direct gaze that was her most characteristic expression, no deflection. No management of the question's implications, just the question itself, asked by someone who understood that asking was important. He thought about it honestly. I want to be known, he said. Not for what I am in the cosmic sense. Not for the yang or the primordial function or any of that. I want to be known the way you know someone you have sat with through enough mornings that the knowing is simply part of the texture of the day. He paused. I want to be the person who is here, specifically, and whose being here specifically matters to people who are also specifically here. He looked at his hands. I grew up without that. Every version of belonging I had to build from nothing, usually by being louder and more persistent than the situation recommended. I do not want to build this one. I want it to simply be what it already is, without building. The room was quiet. Unohana said, "It already is what it is." "Yes," Isane said. Quietly. Firmly. Yoruichi said nothing. She simply looked at him with the amber eyes that had been measuring him since the first day and had arrived, sometime in the last 2 weeks, at the conclusion that measurement was no longer the appropriate mode, that what was required was simply looking. Senjumaru reached into the folds of her robe and produced the small silk panel. She set it on the low table in the center of the ark, the panel with the 6 figures in the founding square, and she looked at him across it. "Already is," she said. Yuichiro, to his left, said nothing for a long moment. She looked at the panel and at the room and at the window and at each of the women in the ark, and then at him. "You told me," she said finally, "that you wanted to be where it was known that your specifically being present mattered." She paused. "I want you to know that it matters. To me specifically. In the way that things matter to Yuichiro, which is completely, without hedge, for the full duration." He looked at her. She met his gaze with the expression that was entirely hers, composed and patient, and carrying in it now the thing she had been reconsidering, the strategy of holding nothing replaced by something that was not its opposite but its evolution, the decision to hold what could not be lost, the decision to hold him. Ryunosuke said across the ark, "For the record, I have only known you for 6 days. But I was in the Shurgon for 400 years, and I know the difference between the absence of something and its presence, and I know which this is." He let it all land. He did not deflect. He did not qualify. He received it the way he had told Yuichiro she should receive what he gave, completely, without the protective mechanism of treating the giving as something smaller than it was. He received it, and held it, and felt it settle into the specific place in him that had been waiting for something like this since long before the Suriidai, since Konoha, since the academy, since the very first morning he had walked into a world that did not initially want him and decided to be there anyway until the wanting caught up. The wanting had caught up. "Thank you," he said. And the 2 words contained everything he had not yet said and did not need to say, and everyone in the room understood them in the complete way that words are only understood when they are spoken by the right person in the right room at the moment, when they are most true. Outside, the old district's morning held its warmth, and the founding square 3 streets overpulsed with 13 signatures that had stopped fading, and the plum tree in the compound garden reached its branches into a sky that was more gold than white, and in the Soul Palace above the clouds the fragment pulsed on its own for the 7th consecutive hour, steady and self-sustaining and giving, in its new form, something outward into the world that the world was beginning, slowly and thoroughly to receive.